Good evening, everyone. Today is Friday, the second week of Advent, and so we light two candles again, the Hope Candle and the Peace Candle, the two violet candles, as we watch and wait for Christmas Day. And with Tabitha, we do the same. We're following her on her journey. Where will her journey take her? We're not exactly sure. However, we're going to jump in. She's just discovered that something has happened to Jothan in Jericho, and maybe we're going to find out a little bit more about what that was. The title of this chapter is The Star. Tabitha struggled to free herself from the man's grip, but he held her tightly. She spun around and saw that he had only 2 teeth, and both were black with rot. His eyes were red and his nose crooked, his lips pulled back in what Tabitha thought was supposed to be a grin, but was lopsided and evil. With drool running from his mouth, the man said, "Come with me. I'll help you find your way." "No!" Tabitha yelled, still struggling. "Let go of me!" But the man still hung on. "I thinks you will fetch a fine price," the man hissed, and he started to lift her under his arm to carry her. But before her feet even left the ground, Tabitha decided she was not going to be someone's slave girl. With all her strength, she swung the pot in her hand and hit the man square on the head. The pot shattered, the man screamed, and Tabitha broke free. Having no idea what else to do, Tabitha ran into the house of Silas. "Jotham!" she yelled. "Nathan! Silas!" But no one answered. Everywhere she looked, she found only rubble and charred remains in the once beautiful house. Tabitha heard a moan and looked back toward the street. Her attacker had fallen to the ground, but was now struggling to his knees. In moments he would be standing again, and very angry. Without another thought, and with no plan other than to get away, she ran out a side door of the house and down a winding street. At the next corner, she turned left onto a wider street and tried to hide herself among the crowds of people. She was just starting to catch her breath and to wonder what she would do now when she saw a wonderful sight. Her grandmother's donkey, the one she had given to Jotham, tied outside a shop of spices. Tabitha's heart soared with hope. She ran to the donkey and greeted it like an old friend. "Elisha!" she yelled. "How I have missed you!" She gave the donkey a kiss on the nose and then said, "And where is your new master?" She looked around, trying to see Jotham amidst all the travelers and sellers and children, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then she noticed that the strap holding the donkey's saddle in place was tied wrong and was cutting into the beast's flesh. "You poor animal! How could Jotham let you suffer so?" She loosened the strap and was just starting to retie it when she heard a screeching cackle like a beast in her worst nightmares. "Don't you touch my donkey!" a haggard old woman screamed. The woman waddled like a big duck as she ran and was shaking a bony finger at Tabitha. "Get away, girl, or I'll sell you to my son for a profit." Tabitha stood up straight and stood her ground. "This is not your donkey," she said as the woman reached her. "She looks like a witch," Tabitha thought, eyeing her ragged clothes adorned with cheap bracelets and pins. "And she smells like one, too." "It is my donkey, and I'll beat you like a dog if you don't back away." The woman was waving a wooden stick over her head, and Tabitha decided that perhaps this wasn't the best time to be brave. "I'm going to find the real owner of this animal," Tabitha said, "and then we're coming back here to have you arrested." The old woman stopped swinging the stick around and looked Tabitha in the eye. "The one who owned this donkey before me," she growled, "was a boy of 10, But he is dead now, and the donkey is mine. Tabitha stumbled backward. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound would come out. Jotham, dead? How? When? Why? Questions and feelings stumbled around inside her head. Her thoughts were all mixed up like rats in a whirlpool. Tabitha turned away from the witch and out onto the street. Jotham? Dead? She kept thinking. What would she do now? Tabitha wandered through the streets, not even noticing the colorful people and strange wares. Images of Silas' deserted house kept forcing their way into her head, and she wondered if Jotham had been inside when it was looted. Finally, she spotted an inn, and remembered the fine meal she had shared with her father at such a place. Pushing through the door, she sat on a bench just inside and put her head in her hands. "No begging here," came a gruff voice from the other side of the room. "And no peddling either. Go your way, and don't bother my guests." Tabitha looked up and saw several people at tables around the inn, all of them staring at her. "I come neither to beg nor to peddle," she said wearily. "I come only to rest, and perhaps have a drink of water." She stopped for a moment, hoping for an invitation, but none came. "Very well, I will go," she said, and stood to her feet. "Hold," came the voice, though not quite so gruffly. "If water is all you seek, I can spare a cup." The man came over to Tabitha then, carrying a ladle of water. He was tall and thin, with a thin, narrow beard. Tabitha gulped down the water and thanked him. "And where is your family?" the man asked. Tabitha's lonely heart poured out the answer to that question, starting with finding a boy in the desert. A large cockroach made 4 trips clear across the room and back, carrying crumbs of bread with each pass, in the time it took Tabitha to tell her story. "This boy," the man said, when she had finished, "could it be that his name is Jotham of Jericho?" Tabitha's eyes shot open. "Yes," she exclaimed, but then sadness took over once again as she added, "But he is dead now." "Dead? When did this happen? How did he die?" "I do not know. It was told me by an old woman who had his donkey," Tabitha said. The man made a disgusted, snorting sound and waved his hand. "That old witch is the mother of Detcha of Megiddo. She lies worse than her son. Jotham is very well and alive, is even now in the company of a priest to the north." "Are you sure?" Tabitha gasped. "Be my honor," the man answered. Then he sat down next to her to tell his story. "My name is Seth, and I was a friend to Silas. I was a good friend. I watched him die right here on this floor," he said, closing his eyes from the pain of the memory. "Jotham was here too, and his friend Nathan." Seth was quiet for a long moment, and Tabitha dared not interrupt his thinkings. Then he shook his head and continued, "I heard Nathan tell another man, a fellow innkeeper, to take the boy to a priest in the north, while he himself stayed to fight Detcha. Hasra was the man's name, Hasra of Bethlehem. He didn't want to leave the fight, but followed the bidding of Nathan. He ran out the door and back with the boy under his arm. I and some other men in the inn joined the battle and scared Detcha off. But by then Jotham and Hasra were far away." Tabitha took all this in for several moments and then asked, "Where is Nathan now?" Seth shook his head sadly. "He went off into the hills on foot to follow the boy." They sat in silence for a time. Then Seth slapped his knees at once and said, "But now it is time to work. You may stay here as long as you wish, and have a bed and your meals free of charge. I do this to honor my friend Silas and his friend Jotham." Tabitha thanked Seth, and it felt like she finally had a friend again. But later that night, as she lay on a bedroll in the dark, staring out a window, Tabitha thought of her family. "Jehovah," she prayed, "please help me find my father. Please lead me to him before the Romans kill him." Suddenly, a bright light filled Tabitha's eyes, and a star, which shone like no other, filled the sky. Tabitha rushed to the door and out into the street. She stared into the sky, taking in the wondrous sight, until at last the thought of a thing she must do had finally arrived in her head. Running back inside the inn, Tabitha shook her sleeping host and whispered in his ear, "Seth, wake up! I must leave this place at once." And that's the end of today's reading. Lies, friends, are the language of the devil. If we listen to those lies, they will hurt us, make our lives miserable, and make it difficult for us to see God. But Jesus came to earth to show us the truth, so we can know the one true God. John chapter 14 says, Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on you do know him and have seen him." You may think Christmas is just about Jesus' birth, but it is much more than that. It's about knowing God and knowing the truth as well. Tabitha had her friend Seth to explain that she was listening to lies. Wouldn't Christmas be a good time to let your friends know the truth about God? I think it's a wonderful time to talk about God. Talk with your parents, talk with your friends, come to church. I hope you have a good night and a great weekend. We'll pick up the story tomorrow.